Hey, good morning, all. Somewhere just out of mind, roiling deep within your soul are unconscious and semi-conscious forces which can break forth at a moment's notice and transform your life in ways unforeseen. Welcome to the Twilight Zone. Hey, welcome back to Law and Legitimacy, everyone. It's Norm and Mike. Where have we been? We were asked the other day, or just moments ago, I should say. Well, I was up in northern Vermont. I had my daughter and a couple grandkids, her significant other, and a couple good friends, and we watched the eclipse. And it was interesting. It was a total eclipse up in northern Vermont, 100% full Monty. And I sat back in a reclining chair and watched my guests react to the eclipse. I'm privileged in that I own a large lodge up there on a lot of land. It's private. We're on a mountaintop, and we are the Lord of always survey there. Other people had to watch this with a group. We were uninhibited. So as the eclipse occurred, we started to howl like animals. And when it was full, we were all 8 of us up there, waiting to see if we could get any response. Who knows where that came from, but it was a good time. And some of the folks who were there, I don't want to name names, were like, oh, ecstatic. This is awesome. Others were sort of nonplussed, and I was somewhat in the middle. I thought, this is unusual. And what it tells me is that external to me in my experience of the world is this vast cosmos filled with items that I don't understand. The sun, the moon, the stars, and that astronomers have the ability to chart the course of these items and foresaw this coming. And for the rest of us, we just look at it with a dumbstruck sense that the world is far broader, filled with forces beyond our ken. And so it was interesting. It didn't get quite as dark as I expected it to be. I thought it would be midnight dark, but it certainly did get dark. There's still 14, 15 inches of snow up there, so it's not like spring has come and the birds stopped tweeting. Our local bear has yet to leave his den. We didn't see any bear paws in the snow. We spent hours snowshoeing, it didn't get pitch black, but it got dark enough. The wind began to howl a little bit, and as the sun came back, there was just one tiny moment where the first glint of the sun appeared like a diamond in the sky. And that moment struck me because there was a moment in time where you could say before this starlight glint, the world was one way, and after it was another. And you're saying, wait a minute, it's the same world. And that's true. We're back to the problem of Heraclitus. Can you step into the same pond twice? It's always streaming, always moving. So, my reaction to the cosmos change or to the eclipse was both quotidian, that is sort of matter of fact, and somewhat profound in the sense that it gave me a sense of our insignificance in the cosmos in general, and how it is that we impose meaning on events for needs all our own. And maybe that's as much as can be learned from the eclipse. I hope you all enjoyed it. There'll be the next full eclipse will in North America, I guess, will take place in about 20 years. Mike will watch it. I'll be lucky to be here. And, you have to take, account of the fact that as you age, your time on this planet, while feeling eternal in the moment you live, can be taken from you at any moment. And thus, one of the great mysteries of time is why there is a world rather than not, and why it is that we're privileged to inhabit it as long as we can. So at Law and Legitimacy, we say, carpe diem, folks. Seize the day, make the most of it. What a wild, 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 wild world down in Texas. And you think that's surprising? It's Texas. Joe Houston.
No. This is Vegas, baby. This is Vegas.
Oh, that's right. Las Vegas. I am. Thank you. Well, okay. Almost what goes in Vegas, what goes on in Vegas doesn't necessarily stay in Vegas. Thank you for the correction. Joe Houston, legendary trial lawyer that way, 77 years old, shot his 30-year law partner, Dennis Prince, 57, and his former daughter-in-law, Ashley Prince, 30, during the deposition of his son. This is a lawyer shooting his law partner to death, shooting his former daughter-in-law to death during the deposition of his son. Now, it appears the reporting on this is not great. I had to read several stories in order to comprehend it as well as I can. And here's what I think happened. Houston's son was at some point married to Ashley. Ashley and Houston's son had a child. That would be Joe's grandson. Ashley, aged 30, probably in her 20s at some point, falls in love with Houston's junior law partner, Dennis Prince, who's now 57, so he's probably in his mid-50s. These two just create a new 6-month-old child. I mean, boy, I'll tell you something. Whatever vagaries are in my path in terms of my love life, I hope never to spawn another child. I was tired with my grandchildren this weekend. I can't imagine being 68 years old and having more children. But I guess there's a difference between 68 and 57, but not much. So in any case, Houston's son and Ashley are in a custody dispute over the son or the child they produce together. They have joint custody, but just this week, Ashley does an emergency motion asking for full custody. Joe Houston is attending the deposition of his son when he pulls out a gun and shoots Dennis Prince and shoots Ashley Prince and then turns the gun on himself. This is the
sort of back it up because you took a little while to get there. So Dad,
I mean, the relationships.
Dad is a former law partner with this other guy who's in this deposition. But this other
former, or were they currently law partners?
I think they were former law partners, but minor detail here. He is representing his son, who is divorced from the counterparty, Ashley, right? But they had a child together during their marriage. They got divorced. They have joint custody of the one child that they have together. She begins dating the dad's law partner, right? And I guess that, they have a 6-month-old kid, and they've been going through this custody arrangement. 2 days ago, Monday, Ashley files for an emergency motion for sole custody of the child that the two had together.
How old was that kid? Do we know?
Not sure. And so the attorney that ended up shooting himself was representing his son on the other side of his former daughter-in-law and on the other side of his, I think, current or former law partner, right? So this is a complete mess. What my immediate reaction to this was something to the effect of how cynical of a view of the legal system from Houston II, right? The gentleman that actually ended up shooting Ashley and what's the other guy's name? I don't know his name. Anyway,
Ashley and Dennis.
And so the reason I said, what a cynical view of the justice system, representing someone in your family is, I don't know that necessarily a great idea, right? There's plenty of attorneys that watch this show that would agree with that. Family can make things pretty complicated and unsatisfying, and they typically don't make great clients. In this circumstance, however, it's something I think different and distinct from that general adage that you don't represent your family, don't mix family and business, that kind of thing for attorneys. This to me, Norm, strikes as extraordinarily cynical because the father shot his former daughter-in-law, shot her current love interest and dad of this new child, right? And which kind of runs counter to his son's interests, right? And then shoots himself almost as a way to say, I will solve this. I will bring this to a conclusion. Oh, you're moving for sole custody? Watch this, right?
Yeah, I hear you. I didn't hear what you were saying until now, and I'm looking at some of the comments, and now the son can get full custody. I suppose that's true. But wow, just wow. I mean, there's an old saying in the law: a person who represents himself has a fool for a client, and I think the reason for that is you obviously are too close to your own situation, and it's going to distort your perspective. I think in this case, doing so in the context of a family law case was double or perhaps triple trouble. But I just, I read this story. Mike sent it to attention after reeling after a murder sentence yesterday for a client of mine. And I don't want to talk about the privileged portions of my relationship with her, but I want to talk about what was put on the record yesterday. In Middletown, Connecticut yesterday, Melanie Christensen was sentenced to 27 years in prison for shooting her lover, her sometime lover, or perhaps its companion. Up to the circumstances might be in dispute. The night that he announced he was returning to his wife and children. And so what you have are these sort of primal passions between individuals resounding and rooted in their primary attachments to their parents, siblings, others, and the world as children, because a love relationship, I think, obviously reflects our deepest connections to the world. And so on a given night, police officers responded to a 911 call. They heard an argument in an adjoining apartment and then several loud bangs. Minutes later, they heard another bang. And when they arrived, a man was shot dead. And Miss Christensen had herself been shot once through the chest, her bullet entering just to the left of her sternum and exiting her shoulder. And her initial claim was that she'd had to shoot him in self-defense after a struggle over a weapon. The forensic evidence didn't support that, and ultimately she pled guilty to shooting him. And you get the sense that shooting arose from a sense of desperation, of desperate attachment to another, and that somehow her attachment to the world or to the common norms and ideas and commitments we make to one another in a civil society had broken, and that she perhaps, and I'm speculating here, was filled with desperation and shot this man as he was about to leave her. And, I couldn't, and so I attend the sentencing. I read her pre-sentence report and learn that she'd had a childhood, however difficult yours may have been or mine may have been, was likely to be more difficult than the childhood of anyone on this broadcast. And I don't want to say more than was on the record, but she herself had been victimized in a number of ways as a child, and no parent believed her. And so she was desperate for attachment. When it didn't happen, bang. And you can't help but wonder whether something like that happened here in the Prince case. It made me, when I tried to wrap my head around this, the Las Vegas shooting, the word that popped to mind was betrayal. Here is Joe Houston, a 77-year-old lawyer at the top of his game, regarded as a top trial lawyer. He loses, the loyalty of his law partner of 30 years because that law partner takes up with his daughter-in-law, thus hurting his son. And now he's undoubtedly feeling a deep sense of rage and a broken attachment and betrayal. Now she seeks to take his grandson from her son, and he lost his stuff. Now, had he lived, the law would impose a set of sterile categories on him. I don't know what the law is in Houston, but applying Connecticut law, murder is, the specific intent, that is the conscious objective to take the life of another. Houston made a decision to do so, shot and killed. And so the law would pretend that these decisions were made in the calm, deliberate faculty of reason, in the lounge of reasonable minds, that Houston woke up one day and said, sort of with Mike, hey, let's get to the end of this game. I'll make sure my son gets custody. Everybody dies but my son. Yeah, but that's not how most of us think, except in our fantasy worlds. And so we may have wishes to behave in such a way. We may have wishes that things like this occur, but most of us know that those wishes are a source of rage and a source of sorrow and a source of betrayal and a source of regret that should drive us to our knees in prayer, or perhaps to our bed in tears. But they shouldn't drive us to the gun cabinet and the ammunition drawer to say, I'll solve this problem the manly way. So, it's a cautionary tale for all of us, I think, because Houston was no stranger to trauma. If you're a trial lawyer, you are engaged in life-defining traumas for other people, and some of the energy of those traumas sticks with you, and you have to learn to put it somewhere. And sometimes those traumas can transform you in ways that you don't necessarily anticipate. I've been candid with listeners here in my life. After 5 years of enormous stress with cases that made international news on an almost daily level, I find suddenly myself between places, as it were, and in a difficult situation. So I think lawyers need to remember that although we are spectators to the trauma of others, we're never merely spectators. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, beware when you look into the abyss, lest the abyss come to look into you. And I think that, lawyers, like doctors, may operate with a foolish sense of immunity, that you can behold the world's sorrows or the world's illness, that you can become a diagnostician, that you can become a trial lawyer and manage risk and trauma for others without some of it sticking to you. Bottom line is, these are tough, tough, tough jobs. And I think with respect to Joe Houston, he made two mistakes, maybe three. First, he represented his own interests in a family case, and then third, he represented his own interests, his son, in a family case, a highly charged case, and then he let his wishes become a reality in a highly uncivilized way, of engaging in murder. Sigmund Freud wrote a very fascinating book called Civilization and Its Discontents, and said, the work of civilization is to impose norms on one another, collective norms that make it possible for us to live together. And the rule of law operates as a general set of principles that govern what is acceptable within a society. Murder isn't, obviously, but the desire to kill is within us all. As Mike and I were talking this morning, and reminded me of an interview we did with Luann Rice, where I said, we're all capable of the worst that's possible. And the task of civilization, the task of the superego, as it were, if you want to be a Freudian, is to modulate the libidinal interests that we have. And the ego, that is the rational function, has to say, look, however much I wish that X didn't happen, I can't make it not have happened. I simply have to cope with it and move on. So the Joe Houston story is awful.
Yeah, and Norm, I got a couple of thoughts here. Number one, I don't know that we have all the of course the facts are they're forthcoming. I believe that the Ashley and the son Houston the third, who was not in the room apparently, but they had two children together, and then Dennis and Ashley had just welcomed in a child of their own, and they were actually married by this point. What I think has occurred here, and the reason I put Greg's comment on the screen, is that I read this without more, and again, facts are forthcoming. I read this less in the way that you do, Norm, in terms of sort of, I guess, a certain bulletproofness that, people at certain realms of the practice can get to in their perception of themselves and their ability to figure things out and be immune from, sort of humanity. I read this as more of, on my side of the scale, this looks like what Greg said, extreme empathy and self-sacrifice. Because as you said, this guy is at the top of his game, right? He doesn't have much to die for in terms of, if he is at the top of his profession, he's made a great living. What he ultimately is hurt by is the fact that, and perhaps he wasn't representing his son before this week, right? There was joint custody that had been awarded to the parties for their children, for the two children. The emergency motion to file for sole custody, and then the inclusion of the new spouse, right, as the attorney for the ex-daughter-in-law, in conjunction with this, to me reads as a cynical view of how the family law system functions, right, and a complete rejection of the immoral nature of what was going on the other side, and a willingness to self-sacrifice for his son to solve the problem in a finite way.
And I hear you. We're just going to have to agree to disagree on this one. I think that, family law, there's a joke in New Haven County. My office is a couple blocks from the courthouse. The third floor is family court. The fifth and sixth floor are violent crimes and, serious crimes. And people joke that the third floor is the most dangerous floor in the courthouse, because in family law, people are showing their worst behavior in court. In criminal court, people are showing their best behavior in court. And if you're going to get hurt, it's going to be family court. I think that, he may have made that calculation, that he'd solve the problem for his son, but he did so in a way that involved the decision to murder others. And that is just unacceptable.
I'm saying
it's unacceptable.
But most people intuitively understand it. Most people would agree with me that there is an intuitive understanding to that, to the solution offered here, right? I'm not saying it's good. I'm not labeling it good on or being morally relativistic. I'm just saying that in this circumstance, these are not people, these are not parties ignorant of the process, right?
I don't know. I mean, I remember my family law instructor in con law or in law school had us read science fiction to understand family law. I just think the passions that go on between a man and a woman, the connections that people form in their most intimate moments, these transcend civilization. These transcend the laws, and that's why there are so many different civilizations. That's what makes the promise of pluralism in a society so important, is that people who experience their bonds through the lens of different religious, cultural, and sociological traditions can live together in peace.
Final thing here. Let me ask you this. They divorced, joint custody was awarded, and the son had initiated the divorce against the former wife, the former daughter-in-law. Do you read anything about the fact pattern in which the wife would only receive joint custody in that situation, and where fault may have lied in that relationship, and what facts may pre-exist that drove?
I'm guessing the following. Ashley fell in love with Dennis, broke the son's heart, and in the end agreed to joint custody, not so much because it was in the child's welfare, but out of a sense of guilt. Because she didn't want, after having given her heart to another, having previously pledged it to the first man, she didn't want to deprive him of everything. As they began to form their own family, Ashley and Dennis, they began to sense the difficulties of managing households, and fantasized about having the child for themselves.
So they probably urgency motion for
ginned up motion against the son.
It's way too poetic. That's bullshit, Norm. I'm sorry. We'll disagree on this. Let's
move on.
Petty bullshit.
Here you can afford to say that because at 34, you're still a young man. At double your age, with several failed relationships behind me, I have a deeper understanding of the rhythms that the heart follows. I wish you a more peaceful path through life than I've enjoyed, Mike. Let's move on. Let's move on to the Trump-Mershon case. I had an interesting excuse me. I had an interesting interview yesterday with I think it was Politico. I had appeared before Juan Mershon years ago when he was handling the Anna Christina case. She was the so-called soccer mom, madam, one of the most prominent purveyors of flesh in New York City, with a client list that many people would have paid to see. And that client list was maintained on servers maintained in different counties, which ultimately crashed after a certain number of unauthorized attempts to access them because she wanted to protect her clients. Mershon was the judge in those proceedings. I was the fourth or fifth lawyer in the case, which is usually the case. Once the case becomes such an unmanageable mess that no person in their right mind would want it, my phone usually rings. I once had a guy who wanted me to take his FCC matter to the United States Supreme Court. He came in to see me and he said, I've spent about $5 million in legal fees on this case. And I said, let me stop right there. And now you're out of money? He said, yeah. I said, why didn't you come to see me $4 million ago? So I took a little bit of money, took the certiorari petition and failed. But anyhow, so I try to appear in Anna Christina's case. Mershon says to the sponsoring lawyer, what? There are 70,000 lawyers in Manhattan. Miss Christina can't find somebody in Manhattan she likes. He was not inclined to grant my application. I pulled out of my briefcase a case called United States versus Gonzalez Lopez, which said in a criminal case, defendants have the right to counsel of choice. I said, fine, judge. Try this case with a New York lawyer first, and we'll regard that as discovery on the remand. And I gave him the case, and he let me into the case. But the question from the CNN or the Politico reporter is, do I think the judge would actually, if he's convicted, put Donald Trump in prison? And it's a powerful, powerful question. Let's play it out for a moment. Trump is accused in a multi-count indictment. I think it's 45 counts. I can't recall exactly. With having falsified public documents in order to cover up the hush money payments that Michael Cohen, his lawyer, brokered to Stormy Daniels, a former stripper with whom Donald was apparently in flagrante delicto. In other words, he was banging her, and he didn't want the world to know, and so she was offered money. Suppose he's convicted. Now that is a hypothetical.
That's the theory, at least.
Yeah, that's a hypothetical. I'm not sure the case. I'm not sure he will be. I'm not sure as a matter of law, based on what I've read about the case, that the case should even get to a jury. But suppose he's convicted. Would Judge Mershon put him in prison? And if he does, what would the world look like? Never in American history has a former president been indicted in this matter. Never in American history, with the possible exception of Eugene Debs, who ran for president as a socialist back in the early 20th century and got a high percentage of the votes. But I don't think that's the only other occasion in which an imprisoned man ran for president. But consider this, and consider it carefully. We have two major parties in the United States. We have deep political divisions. Our political rhetoric is way out of control. We have individuals who at the dinner table are talking nonsense that doesn't reflect how they live, and their family members can't understand them. We have families disintegrating, breaking up over political differences. Consider the following. The Republican Party will nominate Trump. If Trump is convicted and Merchan puts him in prison, he would be saying to one of the major parties in the United States and to their supporters that your candidate is a criminal who belongs behind bars. That will drive some people away from voting for Donald Trump, but other supporters will double down on their vote for him. And that will produce an even worse crisis of legitimacy in the United States, because what they will be saying is, notwithstanding the fact that this man has been found to have broken the law, notwithstanding the fact that this man has been imprisoned, we want him to be our leader. In other words, we want a man who has broken the law to lead us under the rule of law. Again, my head's exploding this morning. You can't make this stuff up.
Well, some of the more recent stuff here, we've talked about Cohen's AI foray, right? And so the evidence that the court is supposed to be entertaining as to his credibility as a witness is at least influenced by that. We've also got the existing gag order, and then something else that's been popping in recent weeks, and I want to make sure to explicitly note Laura Loomer's reporting on this, but it's Judge Merchan's daughter's activity as a left-wing activist, and her involvement in contributions to the Biden campaign, connections to Pelosi and otherwise. What you're seeing, Norm, and the reason this hypothetical is so powerful is it's not simply a rejection of the merits of the case. It's hyper partisanship on both sides, but from the public's perspective, an obvious motive, a politically motivated prosecution of Trump in this case, when Stormy Daniels herself has said that she doesn't really care about the outcome here really at all, right? Her interests are not being served. She still owes Trump money from his win over her in a civil litigation for the defamation, right? So this all stinks in a way that is almost unfathomable. And so to your point, I think, even considering that he could be incarcerated if found guilty, I think that number one, there's not a whole lot that Trump could do from this point forward that would alienate his base. But why would the outcome of this case, given everything that I just talked about, why would the outcome of this case shift that whatsoever anyway? Right?
Well, I hear you. I guess my point is just somewhat different. You're aware of the expression about pouring new wine in old skins, and they cause those skins to burst. My impression is that there is something going on in the political landscape right now, wherein our customary political ideas and our partisan alignments and whatnot don't reflect the reality of the lives we live, and that we're reaching a flashpoint, and that if we come to the point that the rule of law administered by people entrusted to administer it results in the imprisonment of a major party's political candidacy, this will hold in focus the dissonance in American life in ways that are unforeseen and not foreseeable. And so it might be a good thing to happen. Who knows? Because it'll force people to discuss, how is it that we are going to come to live together with settled expectations about what the law can and can't do? Because I think we've reached a point where we're not doing that any longer. And so, to me, that's my interest in the case. I don't know much more. I want a quick pivot. I want to give credit to Joe Neerman and Good Logic LLC. They're about to file what's called an Article 78 petition in New York, seeking to intervene to set aside Judge Merchan's gag order as to Donald Trump. His position, Mr. Neerman's position, Attorney Neerman's position is that Trump is a major political candidate. Gagging him in the name of an impartial trial deprives the public of a right to hear from a candidate, and deprives the press of its right to interview a candidate about important matters of public concern. We've had the privilege of reviewing a draft of the petition. I've encouraged Neerman to file it as quickly as possible, get this thing in front of the court, because I think that the issues he raises are significant. The press in New York has standing to raise such petitions. Standing meaning the legal right to do so. Donald Trump has been gagged out of concerns for the fair trial rights of the people of New York. But what most listeners don't know is the Sixth Amendment doesn't grant fair trial rights to the government. The Sixth Amendment only grants fair trial rights to a defendant. Now, due process, sounding in the 14th and Fifth Amendments, depending on whether it's state or federal government, may have something to say about fair trials, but they don't say it as directly as the Sixth Amendment does. I think Neerman will file, Mershon will deny, and then I think at that point, Joe will have to consider taking an appeal, and I would encourage him to do so. Our office has been involved with several challenges to gag orders, both in the Fotis Dulos case, and we sent Neerman a copy of our brief in that case. That was pending before the Connecticut Supreme Court when Mr. Dulos committed suicide. We never got a decision. We also challenged similar rulings in the Alex Jones case. And were unable to get them before the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court denied certiorari. So interesting times.
Yeah, your appearance on the Following Pro last week, the two of you spent about a half hour at least talking about this, and the comment here. Thank you for inspiring him to take action, my friend. It was an inspiring segment, Norm. And so I think that any of you that have not actually watched and listened to Good Logic stream with Norm from last week, I do encourage you to go back to that. They do discuss this. And in large part, I think Joe is wrestling with what, Norm? It's sort of the entanglement of his calling as a practitioner, his duty as a lawyer, and I believe the sort of risk-averse, more conservative nature of his family and the affront to what may be his current way of life, right?
It is challenging. Look, I can tell you, having tap danced across the minefield of the Proud Boys trial and the Alex Jones trial, the amount of hatred that he and his family will experience is going to be a challenge to the bonds that hold that family together. I would say that my involvement in these cases was a factor in the dissolution of my marriage, because the family members turned many family members, my wife or former wife, whatever, my separated wife's family is far left, and I began to represent people on the right, and they had a lot to say about it, and it placed her, meaning my wife, in a difficult position. She had to decide whether to placate her family or support me. And in the end, she made more decisions to placate her family, leaving me in a situation that was difficult. And now we have these pieces to pick up and try to rearrange our own lives as best we can. And so, it's not it's not a trivial concern of Joe's. High-profile cases have an energy to them that is potentially toxic. And if you're going to walk into the eye of a storm, you better be goddamn sure that the people in your cabin are with you, because some of them will be stripped away by the storm, and that will have life-changing consequences for everyone. So, thoughts and prayers to Joe. Those of you who believe that this is a good thing for him to do, send him a note, give him your love and support, because once you enter into the pit in one of these nation-defining cases, your soul will be tested in a way that reflects the tests in the nation, and these cases will change you. I once said to a young trial lawyer that worked for me, she was somewhat reserved, and she would come back frustrated after each trial. And I said, what your problem is, Jane Doe? I said, your problem is you're the same person after trial that you are before trial. Every good trial, you leave a little skin on the ground and you come back a slightly different person. We are summoned in life in this world to meet the challenges of the day, and tomorrow will be a different day and you'll be a somewhat different person. You can't hold on, dogmatically to your emotional and existential commitments that you made as a young person, because sometimes you grow, evolve, and outgrow them with potentially cataclysmic consequences. And as we saw, they can create interpersonal tensions and challenges for people. Joe Houston, the thing that we began with, obviously took one commitment, and he took that commitment to destruction. Dawn McNeil says, never surrender your soul. I think tough times remind people that the soul needs tending, and that basically, as a nation or as a people or as individuals, we need to be nourished, hopefully by love of an eternal God, in an ideal world by those around us. But in the end, we are each responsible for ourselves. And Joe Neerman, my thoughts go out to you. You're getting ready to walk a tough road. I'll be here to support you along the way, as will others. So, hey, good news, by the way. I got an invitation from the Michigan Criminal Defense Lawyers Association to be their keynote speaker in July. I think it's July 17th in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I am thrilled beyond belief to have the recognition of my peers and to have the opportunity to stand before others who represent the despised and the accused in the sometimes hateful place we call court, and to share with them what I've learned and to enjoy their support and to give them mine. The rule of law is tested most in hard cases, and high-profile cases reflect the toxicity of our times. Criminal cases reflect that as well. Being a criminal defense lawyer is really part of being a priestly caste. Priests hear private confessions of individuals and offer them an opportunity to make peace with themselves and their God. Criminal defense lawyers stand as secular priests in our society. When a person has broken the pact, broken the bonds that somehow make civil society, it's our job to stand next to the accused and to remember and remind the world that no one is the sum of their least moments. No matter how serious and horrendous the crime, each of us is entitled to love, and the love we give is the love we get in the end. So hats off to Joe Neerman. Thank you to the Michigan Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, and thank you for listening to Law and Legitimacy. Mike, how do people find us?
Make sure you're subscribed at Law Pod Daily. If you're watching here on YouTube or on X, if you're on Rumble, please make sure you're subscribed. Law and Legitimacy over there on Rumble. We're here every weekday morning, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. Eastern time, except this week. But if we do cancel, we try to give you as much notice as possible. In general, though, I think that's probably the first time that we've taken any time off in at least a couple of months. So thank you for your grace, all of you who are watching. And I think you probably recognize that with Norm and I jousting a bit this morning that we're obviously refreshed. So Norm, it's always good to see you. I still disagree with your take, but I do take your advice on having some patience with age and the complicated.
Look, here's the deal. I mean, remember the eclipse. You stood perhaps or sat and you watched the sun become occluded in whole or in part, depending on where you are in the country. And you were reminded that we are small points in the universe, in a vast universe, and that what we make of it differs between people. And so, Mike, I'm not at all upset that we disagree. It's quite possible that we're both right, just at different levels of analysis. And I suspect that is the case. So thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow. And at this point, every time in the show, we say AMF, yo-yo.
AMF, yo-yo, and Alyssa and anyone else. It's all one word, at LawPod Daily. At LawPod Daily. It's all one word, right? We'll get that right, though. YouTube just hasn't learned that we're more important than whatever it's putting up there. Anyway.
Is it YouTube or you boob? Come on, guys, get it right.
You space tube, right? Anyway, see you tomorrow, Norm. See you, everybody. AMF, yo-yo. No.